So the biggest epidemic that I've seen spreading and growing like crazy, especially over the last few years, is people behaving in a way that more or less shares a lot of similarities to someone with a personality disorder. And I've seen that to be especially true, especially within the millennial and Generation Z demographics. And what I mean by that is significant instability in their identity, poorly defined concepts, ideals, and outcomes, constantly moving the goalposts, and a real lack of personal responsibility and accountability. And living in this way creates a lot of conflict and does not form a solid foundation for relationships or general success in life. And this foundational lack of clarity tends to create a deep feeling of unease, anxiety, while removing any real sense of purpose and meaning in life. And it's really an approach to life that more or less positions one as constantly on the defense and in a fairly disempowered orientation to life. So, if you spend any time at all paying attention to how the overall cultural and social conversations have changed over the last 3 years, a lot of the stuff will be quite obvious. If you've paid any attention to social media, this will be quite obvious. If you've been into any alternative and spiritual worlds over the last 5 or 10 years, many of the stuff will be quite obvious and quite easily relatable. So the first dynamic that I'll point out is the significant instability in their sense of identity, which is of course significant instability in thoughts, emotions, and behavior. So basically an identity crisis of sorts, wherein a person dedicates a great deal of their time and energy to finding themselves, to self-discovery, to self-improvement, to self-actualization, to finding their highest purpose, their authentic self, their true self, all the while dividing themselves up into all these different aspects and pieces, mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, energetic, soul, spirit, inner child, shadow, and many other divisions for many other things that we could spend hours going over, but that's just hopefully enough to give you an idea. And it's basically having an unstable sense of self that leads to having real difficulty with what's called identity integration, which means that they have trouble bringing themselves together to form, or bringing the various parts of their identity together to form a cohesive whole. So that fundamental lack, that fundamental instability, that fundamental insecurity, let's call it, creates the need and really the requirement for an abundance of coping mechanisms like therapy, pop spirituality, yoga, all types of different diets, all types of different plant medicines and psychedelics, all types of different biohacking modalities, psychiatric medication, porn, casual sex, dating apps, social media, and many forms of constant stimulation through constant media consumption, which again is more or less just kind of the normal lifestyle these days. And I guess not a lot of people necessarily took the time to think or realize or ask where it's coming from. And that if someone needs to fill their day with coping mechanisms just to function, what does that imply? What does that suggest? And especially the fact that all of those industries are blowing up, especially over the last 3 years, really affirms and suggests and supports what I'm saying is that very oftentimes the people within them have a serious identity crisis going on and more or less have significant instability in their fundamental identity, which causes instability in their thoughts, feelings, emotions, and their relationships. Now, of course, obviously, solving a specific problem, acquiring a specific skill set, or filling in a certain deficiency in our character is a valid and different thing than what I'm describing. So the second dynamic that I see quite a lot, which is also part and parcel with people having identity crisis and experiencing really a really shaky foundation, is poorly defining the concepts that define and motivate and organize their life. And then in addition to that, constantly moving the goalposts in terms of their relationships and their expectations and even the ephemeral, shady kind of vague definitions that they might be working with. So if that sounds like a word salad, I'll kind of unpack it over the next few minutes. So what I just described is more or less a classic manipulation strategy that has been used by power structures for quite a while, and is something that generally unhealthy people do in relationships, meaning they poorly define concepts and outcomes, and they're constantly kind of moving the goalposts around. And if that sounds crazy or weird, just look at how advertising and marketing typically work. Look at how the food industry works and how it's basically based in deceit. Look how politics and slogans and jargon and placards work. Meaning they say something like change. Oh, we're all about change in this year, and everyone's like, yeah, change. Yeah, change is cool. And maybe they talk about problems and generate people's emotions and get their fight or flight response going, but they don't actually define what change means, what it looks like, and what that actually entails. Which the problem there is that, well, you'll never know when you actually achieve it. And if you never define it, you never really know how to actually achieve it. And that's all kind of part of it, because the function of it is to just generate people's emotions so they can project their own meaning into it and then attach that meaning to whatever that person is selling. And then that's basically it. So then it's kind of like really one of the most classic political strategies that's been used, at least in America, for quite a long time. So that ends up causing a person to organize their life searching for something that they haven't defined, like, oh, finding myself or changing or growing or my authentic self or healing my shadow or healing my inner child or any other fill in the blank example. And then dividing themselves up into all these poorly defined aspects, and then striving for and fighting for ideals that they haven't defined, striving for markers that they haven't defined, trying to achieve things that they've also not defined, which is kind of not really a good recipe for success. It's like, I'm going to go on vacation. Where are you going to go? How long are you going to be gone? How are you going to get there? How are you going to pay for it? Okay. Sounds like you don't know. Sounds like there's not much there. So what happens is these two dynamics taken together, meaning significant instability in the identity, in their thoughts, feelings, emotions, behaviors, and then poorly defined concepts, poorly defined outcomes, and kind of constantly shifting the goalposts around, means that when people relate to each other, it's based on insecurity, it's based on instability, it's based on anxiety, because no one really knows what's the agreed upon thing. It's like we all look at stop signs and we understand we should stop. I mean, not to say that we always do or that everyone always will, but we all can kind of agree that as a way of bringing some order out of the chaos of a four-way intersection or whatever, that we're all going to stop at this sign. But then if someone comes along and say, hey, you know what? Actually, stop signs don't exist in nature. They're a complete illusion. They're a complete facade. They have no real basis in reality. And the fact that they're red is slightly violent. And the fact that it's in English is colonialism and it's oppressive. And the fact that it uses straight lines is unnatural because there's no straight lines in nature. And I could do a whole dissertation about why. If everyone starts thinking that, then when they come up to a four-way stop, it creates confusion. It creates anxiety. It's like, well, are they agreeing to this thing that we all kind of agree with, or are they pretending like they're not going to because they're have all this instability? It's like, so then you kind of look at the person and they look at you and you're both kind of looking at each other, and it just creates a lot of confusion. There, especially intersections where if it's a four-way, traffic going, let's say east to west, doesn't have to stop, but then traffic going north to south does. So then let's say you're waiting at the stop sign going north to south, and someone going east to west comes up and they don't have a stop sign, but they stop. Even though there's no stop sign, they will stop. Even though you're waiting at a stop sign and they have no stop sign, they will stop. And they're looking at you like, go, 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 go. I'm going to be polite. I'm going to be the virtuous higher person and let you go. And it's like, why? You're creating more difficulty, you're creating more chaos, you're creating more instability and confusion and anxiety and stress in energy expansion, and you probably care about the environment or something. So it's like it's actually worse for your gas mileage to stop and start, because that's where most of the gas is expended from the stopping and starting of the car rather than a constant even speed. So you're contradicting all of your own alleged values and ideals, and you're creating outcomes that are opposite of what we all have agreed upon would be useful. For what? And I know that's a stupid example, but it happens quite often, and it happens quite often in many other circumstances. I just say that to prove that when you have a shaky foundation, when you don't have stability in basic fundamentals of relating to life, by definition, by default, as a pretty guaranteed result, that's going to create confusion, anxiety, stress, turmoil, conflict, instability, which I'm not sure at any point in time in human history has anyone ever said that those were positive outcomes or positive feelings or positive emotions or things that you would want to feel while you're alive or things that would be useful in any way, shape, or form